Hello, my name is Mary Ellen King. I'm president of the Austin Bar Association. We are here today for another episode of Stop the Stigma podcast. In this podcast, we are discussing stories of personal recovery in order to try to erase the stigma surrounding discussions of mental health, substance abuse, and thoughts of suicide in the legal profession. Today, we have Shana Faulhaber with us. Welcome, Shana.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and appreciate you guys asking me to share my story today.
Absolutely. Just tell us a little bit about you. Where do you live? What kind of practice do you have? How long you've been practicing? Just a background to give us an idea of who we're talking to.
I am a criminal defense attorney and yoga teacher and mediator from Dallas, Texas. I have been practicing law since the fall of 2005. My journey took me for a very brief stop first to Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, then to the Smith and then Dallas County District Attorney's offices. And I've been in private practice since 2008. Something else, I guess, somewhat noteworthy about me is that in the height of the pandemic, when we were all still tucked away at home, I had this idea to create a Facebook group called Texas Lawyers Wellness. That was in winter of 21. And shortly after that, I got it recognized by the State Bar of Texas as a local bar so that we could start providing CLE. And we've grown to about 2,300 Texas attorneys. So that is one of my passion projects and where I spend a lot of my energy outside of my law practice.
And I love that page. I'm a member of that page and I love the shared content there. There's some TLAP representatives on that page that often shares content. So thank you for doing that. It's a really helpful Facebook page. In a time when Facebook can be not so helpful, the Lawyer Wellness page is very helpful. Well, today you're here to talk to us about your journey to recovery. So what made you want to go on the podcast and what would you just like to generally discuss?
So I'm glad that you mentioned TLAP. I've been a TLAP volunteer since 2015, and I've been on the committee. I'm starting my third year term. So that's in part why there's a strong TLAP contingency in Texas Lawyers Wellness, is because I encourage them to chime in. And so stopping the stigma is a concept that is near and dear to TLAP's heart. And when I saw that y'all were undertaking this endeavor, I was so excited and happy because I'm a big believer that when it comes to these types of conversations, more is better. So I wanted to support y'all. And the best way that I could think of after I saw y'all's post maybe 2 or 3 times about it was to come on and spend some time with you guys.
I love that. I love that. I agree. I think that the more we share our stories of, struggles and trauma and recovery, the more people, because everybody has them, everybody at some point in their life will have that. The more people will be like, it's okay, it's normalized. There's help available to me through TLAP or whatever else. So, thank you, for coming on here and discussing that. Can you share what led to you to try alcohol for the first time? Do you recall when you first tried it and how old you were?
Absolutely. I most definitely remember my very first drink of alcohol, and it was in tandem with my first ever cigarette. And I was 14 and I was with my childhood best friend. Her older sister, who was, I don't know, 17 or 18, was looking at the two of us. We were standing in her kitchen and she's like, ugh, y'all are such squares. You've never done anything. Follow me. And took us into her garage and gave us a cigarette and a beer. And that was that. And it was interesting because, I think like most people trying alcohol for the first time, especially at a young age, you're like, ooh, this tastes disgusting, but it's cool. So I better try it again and again and again. And I remember the first time that I felt the effects of alcohol thinking, this is where it's at for me. It changed the way I felt. And in general, as a teenager, the way that I felt was bad. And so when I drank, I somehow felt more cool, more actually I'll use the word less anxious, less insecure, and just more like Superman.
Yeah. And so how did that develop over time to where it ultimately led to a place where you felt you had an addiction to substances?
So I sort of wore my party girl badge for the first decade, I'd say, of drinking. It's interesting because in retrospect, they say hindsight's 2020. I can look back and sort of pinpoint where it had really become an issue, but at the time I didn't see it that way. So, I was drinking. I would say like through high school, I was binge drinking. I'm going to parties and I'm binging, but I'm a kid, so I'm coming home and I'm not drinking. That kind of thing. So I definitely didn't identify that as an issue at the time. All my friends were binge drinking too. In undergrad, I was kind of playing Susie Homemaker. I had a boyfriend who was 5 years older, and I lived in his home with him that he owned. And I was kind of like nose into the books and not really doing much, and definitely wasn't thinking about any issues at that point. By the time that I got to law school, I was in my early 20s. And I was becoming aware of the fact that I had a problem with anxiety because I had started having panic attacks. And I remember distinctly the first night, well, it would have been the night before the first night of classes in law school. I couldn't fall asleep. And that became the story every single night for the entire 3 years of law school. Every single night, couldn't sleep. I was exhausted. I'd been studying, and admittedly also partying. I went to law school at the University of Miami. So South Beach was a rock's throw away, and I was in my early 20s. So let your imagination run wild there. But I couldn't sleep. I'm having panic attacks. I didn't know what to do. And it was interesting because that was actually how I got into yoga and meditation because I did not want to go down the path of pharmaceuticals. And so I didn't know what to do. I Googled, but back then we called it Yahoo, non medicinal panic attack cures. And I found that meditation and yoga were supposed to be good. I was already a gym person. I knew the gym had yoga classes. So I started going to that. And I started a daily meditation practice where I was coming home after school every single day, setting a 20-minute timer and just doing like breath work for 20 minutes. And it was amazing because the panic attacks went away completely within 3 months. The anxiety and the insomnia, however, did not. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I had begun using alcohol at that point to go to sleep. And so I think that was sort of, in hindsight, a pivotal moment, a turning point in my drinking. And it's funny because this is the early 2000s. And I do think we've made some improvement as a culture in the last 20 plus years. However, at that time, I justified and rationalized my nightly Cabernet habit by I'm going to be a lawyer, and all lawyers do this. It's obviously not true, but the culture that I was seeing as I'm starting to, look for internships and go into law firms. I had actually worked as a paralegal briefly for law firms before law school, so I had had some experience to legal culture. I knew that a lot of lawyers had a bottle of scotch in, their desk drawer for the end of the day. And also my law school, we had like a quad in the middle of the campus that was called the Bricks, and they gave us free kegs once a week. Every Tuesday, we had beer on the Bricks.
Mhm.
And so in my head, I wasn't doing anything wrong. This was a normal part of growing up. But my red wine habit that I was using to go to sleep quickly ballooned, from a glass a night to a bottle a night to I bought the 3-liter box so that I wouldn't know how many bottles a night.
Oh, wow. How many bottles are in the 3-liter box? Do you know?
4.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. So what this is like fast forward what I've come to learn as an adult, or as a, I guess, midlife, you have these epiphanies. It's really counterintuitive because for me, like my sleep if I have a drink, my sleep is worse and my anxiety is worse, you know. But people do think it helps. It helps them calm in that moment or whatever, but it just exacerbates everything, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an entire body of scientific research out there that shows that alcohol gives you a lousy night's sleep. Like, we know
Mhm.
that. However, I was not that smart in my early 20s. And, the interesting thing is that I was wound so tightly that the wine was helping me let down, right? So I was already meditating and practicing yoga, but I didn't have all the tools in my toolbox that I have now. I didn't know what to do. So it was the end of the day and I just didn't know what to do. So I was drinking the wine to relax. And, I would get relaxed, but I would get relaxed to the point that, I'm like, there is a large period of my young adult life that I never actually went to sleep because I didn't go to sleep. I passed out.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced when you were in the throes of addiction?
So I don't know that I necessarily recognized them all in the moment, but looking back, um, you know, my self-care was struggling greatly. Like I mentioned, there was a period of time that I don't even remember going to sleep because I was just passing out every night. And I always say, I'm like, it's really hard to brush and floss your teeth every night before bed when you don't remember going to bed. And I can tell you that 20 years later, I still suffer with the fallout of that, as I have to go every 4 months for my perio maintenance dental visit. Had one yesterday because I literally wore down my gums from just not taking care of them. So, there's fallout from my lack of self care that I still struggle with today. Um, Also, in my legal career, getting ready for big events like trials, right? Um, if you're drinking every night, you just don't feel your sharpest when you wake up in the morning. And there was a lot of shame around that, but also a feeling of not knowing what to do. Um, I think those were some of the big things. Then back to the self care, not eating properly, not having control of myself because, once you drink past a healthy amount, your impulse control goes down, your inhibitions go down, and grabbing for things that you shouldn't, as far as like food, and just making other questionable choices. And I think that I just came to a point where I realized that everything was getting out of hand.
What kind of treatment did you seek at first?
My first stop was into the 12 step rooms. And so I worked the 90 meetings in 90 days. I've gone through the steps and done all of that. And that was definitely my first experience in recovery.
How long did you do that?
Exactly 90 days. And then I went out and celebrated with sake bombs.
So, and I laugh because that's not uncommon, right? I mean, it's not a recovery is not like generally for everyone, it's not this linear, uh, it's not like bam, it's done. It takes a lot of work, right? You have to continue to do the things that helps you get through it. How did you decide on the 12-step program?
12 step is wildly known as the biggest and by some people's regard the only recovery game in town. So it's got, it's sort of for, I don't know, 100 years or however long it's been considered the gold standard. It is the most well known. And, at the time, I think it was the only path that I had ever heard of. And I'm sure that I had some friends at that point who were like, I think you drink too much. You should probably go check this out. But like I mentioned, my first foray into AA, I celebrated with sake bombs, finishing the steps and doing the 90 and 90. And I came to realize in part that's just my personality. And I don't know if it's a lot of alcoholic or addicts, or lawyers, but I'm a very goal oriented person. I'm the same way with like weight loss or working out or whatever. Like if you give me a goal, I will meet it, right? I'm going to do the thing and I'm going to do the heck out of it. However, doing something that stringent or rigid for me always winds up having what I call the rebound effect, because as hard as I'm going to go towards the good is as hard as I'm going to go towards the not so good or not so healthy. So my journey has been a lot better served when I seek out the middle path.
Okay, nice. And so what is the middle path for you?
So, like, let's use eating as an example. If I eat healthy nonstop 24/7, eventually it's going to feel like a punishment to me because I love treats. I love french fries, and I can't wrap my mind around a world where I never have birthday cake. I just can't do it. So, for me, I'm much better served by what a lot of people call the 80/20 eating plan, where you eat for health 80% of time and pleasure 20% of time. Now, I'm lousy at moderation. So that's why with something like alcohol, I don't try to moderate it because I quit for 2.5 years, and then I went back for a year and a half. And I did that at a point in time when I was single, and I got sick of going out on dates and having my date say, "Would you like to share a bottle of wine over dinner?" And me saying, "Oh, I don't drink." And them saying, "Why?" And then I'm like, "Oh, because I'm a lousy drunk. I don't know." And I just got sick of those conversations, and I got secure enough in my sobriety where I falsely believed that I could drink like a lady this time. So I made all of these rules with myself. Okay, like I'm only going to drink, a glass of wine when I go out on a date. I'm never going to drink at home, blah, blah, blah. And it worked fine for like about a year. And then um, after about a year, that slippery slope started coming back where I started using alcohol as medicine to deal with my feelings and emotions. And it went quickly from seeming like I was drinking like I was like, I'm gonna drink like a lady. And it went quickly from that back to like stopping on the way to the next place to have a double before a hard conversation to, taking pulls off of a vodka bottle at 3 o'clock in the morning after my now husband's, punk rock gig. And it just like within 6 months, it just all went to poo again. And I quit again with my now husband. And we've been sober for it'll be 8 years in November.
Well, congratulations. That's an incredible
Thank you.
accomplishment. Do you think it's easier having somebody who's doing it with you as an accountability partner?
Yes. Um,
I also, I mean,
uh,
I think that's one reason that, why that's a lot of people encourage a 12-step program. We've talked in some other episodes about the importance of community and having someone walking along a journey with you. But, I've been in a 12-step program and, they have a sponsor. So that's your accountability partner. So it sounds like you've got a built-in accountability partner. So that's really good.
I do. However, I would be remiss not to say that I also know people who have quit when their partner has not.
Yes.
And I do think that it is challenging, but I just want to put it out there that I do know that it is possible because I have people in my personal network who have successfully done it and maintained it for years.
And that's very hard, but that's admirable of them to be able to do that. What has been the biggest adjustment for you in your path of recovery?
So when I got sober, not really, not for the first time because I told y'all about the 90 and 90. So I had had 3 months prior. But the second time I got sober, where it lasted for 2.5 years, that was in 2012. At the time, I was living in Dallas. I was had my solo criminal defense practice. I'm teaching yoga, but I was also booking local bands. So I was hosting weekly open mics, and a lot of my personal network was musicians at the time. And the what's given lasting recovery for me did not come from the 12-step program. It came from a friend of mine who had kicked a heroin addiction, and he gave me the title of a book, which I bought, which was called Rational Recovery. It was written by a guy named Jack Trimpey. And it's more of a neuroscience based approach to recovery. He talks about brain science and the decision making that's involved with choosing to take a drink, the interplay between our impulsive reptilian brain and our prefrontal cortex human brain. And he has you make what he calls a big plan. And the big plan is that you are never going to drink again. Never, ever, ever for the rest of your life. So it's very counterculture to one day at a time. It is you make a choice, you make a decision, you will never drink again, and then you hold yourself accountable every minute of every day for the rest of your life. So I first made that big plan back in 2012. And to circle back to the answer to your question of what were the hardest adjustments, like I said, at that time, I was booking bands and I was very much in the local Dallas music culture. And I remember a particular day that I went to a concert and I was newly sober. And at that point, by 2012, my drinking had progressed. I was still drinking red wine by myself at home, but when I would go out, I was shooting whiskey, a lot of whiskey. And so, being newly sober and still in that scene where people were used to coming up and saying hello with a free shot of whiskey instead of a handshake, I'm finding myself like navigating all this new territory. And I remember at this one particular show at a club called the Double Wide in Dallas, watching a band that I loved. And when I left, I got in my car and my legs felt weird. And I lost control of them. It was the strangest thing. Like my legs started like quivering and I couldn't make them stop. And I remember I didn't know what to do. So I drove myself to the emergency room. And it turns out it was like I hadn't struggled with panic attacks in so long, right? I mean, like a decade. But I had been so uncomfortable being sober at this show that I had stood there with my legs locked for 3 hours. And so I was
Oh,
just like in this like I wanted to have fun, right? But I was so insecure, clammed up, don't give me any whiskey, like I'm here, but like don't really look at me. And so I locked down my whole body. And when I got in the car, everything just kind of like came unglued. And what I realized was that I was going to have to relearn how to have fun. And so it was really important to me because I've always loved going out and loved dancing. And so that was like the biggest adjustment was recognizing that a lot of my identity had been wrapped up for, decades since that 14-year-old girl first had her first cigarette and beer of like being this party girl. And recognizing that I could be that party girl without substances.
yeah. Yeah. And still have fun, right?
Absolutely. So that was the biggest adjustment for me was learning how to still go out, still dance, still be like, the carefree version of myself that I had always loved under the influence of alcohol, but without the alcohol.
And wake up the next morning and feel a lot better, right?
Yes.
Yoga is easier the next day, right? Um, what do you have? What's your daily continuing challenges? Like, what do you face daily in your recovery that is a challenge to you that, for example, do you ever feel tempted by alcohol and how do you um not, succumb to relapse or slips or anything like that?
So it's very rare for me that I feel tempted. Sometimes, like maybe 0 to 3 times a year, I will have a thought, about, like, and it's always when I'm in a bad mood and I'm worked up about something. Ugh, like, it'd be really nice to just have a glass of wine right now. But for me, it's really truly as simple as I have a big plan, I don't drink, so that's not on the table. What else can I go do? And that brain train is something that 8 years later is so ingrained in me, it's like second nature. It's just simply not on the table. Um, And, I mentioned, I'm like, I don't work a 12-step program. We keep alcohol in the house. My stepmom is a Cabernet drinker, which was my wine of choice. It's in the house right now. And it has been every day for years because I love entertaining. So when my family comes over, I want to have the stuff that they want. So her Cabernet is there. My dad's whiskey is there. My drink of choice for when I went out. And it's never a temptation. It's never a problem because it's simply not on the table for me. And on a day to day basis, I don't think about the fact that I'm in recovery. It's really like not a huge part of my identity at this point. Um, I love talking about it. Because people have come back and told me that it's helpful and I want to be of service. Um, and I'm always available to anybody that wants to chat about recovery. I love talking about it with other people. But in my day to day, it's really not a big part of my identity or my story. Like my husband and I don't really talk about it. I think I posted on Facebook on our 7 year. I'm like, I used to think of myself as a drinker, and then I thought of myself as a non drinker, and then I thought of myself as sober. And now, really, I just think of myself as free.
Yeah. Yeah. Yourself. That's who you are. So tell me when you have these maybe 3 times a year where you get frustrated and you say, "Oh, a glass of wine would be really nice," and you said maybe you go do something else. What are some examples of your something else that you do, instead of having a drink?
So it could be a cup of herbal tea. It could be meditation. It could be really bad reality television. It could be phoning a friend. But it's so not on the table for me that all I have to do is just shift my attention to
Mhm.
something else. It's not something like when those thoughts come, it's not something that I dwell on because it's just not an option.
Right. Because you've committed to this goal after remind me of the name, Rational Recovery, is that the name of it? And you
Yep.
can just find it on Amazon probably?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm gonna read that book. Well, that's great. All of that is great. I have a random question before we move to one of our podcast questions. You mentioned you like French fries. What's your favorite place to get a French fry?
So if we are talking about fast food,
Right.
it's gotta be a toss-up between the classic McDonald's and the Arby's curly fry.
Oh, really? The Arby's curly fry.
If we're talking about a sit-down restaurant, I don't know if they exist outside of Dallas, but you have to get yourself to Snuffers and have their loaded cheese fries because there is nothing better.
Snuckers,
Snuffers.
Sniffers. Okay, I got it. I'm making a note of that now. Shayna, we've been sitting here talking about, your path to recovery and how you tried the 12-step program, and ultimately that wasn't what lasted for you. The rational recovery book really made a difference. And I've heard other people before say maybe the 12-step program is a little tough for them or it doesn't work for them. So, what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with substance abuse, who realizes they need help, but is not interested in the 12-step program?
So I absolutely don't want to take anything away from the 12-step program. I know that it has helped so many people over so many years, and I am so grateful that they exist and do what they do. However, if for one reason or another it doesn't resonate or you're not interested, just know that there are a lot of other options out there, although they may not be as mainstream. So I mentioned that book that a friend just happened to suggest to me, and honestly, just reading that book really like set me on my course for long-term sobriety. I know in the last 10, 15 years, there's been several other really awesome recovery books out there that a lot of my friends have told me really helped them as well. Um, but I would say, of course, if you are a lawyer, law student, etc., definitely call TLAP, which is the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. It is confidential by statute. They have a 24/7 hotline. It's 1-800 1-800-343-TLAP, 1-800-343-TLAP. Not only can you call it, but you can text it as well. And the people that are on there, I know them that answer the calls. I know them all personally since I serve on the committee. They are all wonderful, trained, compassionate people. Not only will they listen to you and provide on the spot um, support, they can match you with a peer assistance TLAP volunteer if that's what you're interested in, where you can have one on one with another lawyer who has gone through similar struggles. If you're looking specifically for non 12 step support, that person that you get matched with could be me. I've been a TLAP volunteer since 2015. Um, there are communities out there online, like mine that I mentioned at the beginning of the program, Texas Lawyers Wellness. You can join there. You can post anonymously to that group for support. And we have an amazing network of, like I said, like 2,300 lawyers that are happy to cheerlead, connect with you. I mean, if you go in that group, you will see like when people post looking for support, a lot of times like dozens of people will post their phone numbers and say, call me. I'm here for you anytime. You can go to the internet and look for other alternative support groups. There's a lot of them out there that are non 12 step. I am a huge proponent of therapy, okay? Working with a licensed professional counselor or a psychologist or a social worker. And I have to mention that we have a new member benefit for the State Bar of Texas that I am so proud of our immediate past president of the State Bar of Texas, Cindy Tisdale, for pushing this through. I'm like, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. So she got, as a member benefit for all members of the State Bar of Texas, 1 month of free therapy online through BetterHelp. So
Oh,
it
that's
is on.
incredible.
Yes, huge, huge, huge deal. And so if you go to the State Bar of Texas website and you look under member benefits, all you have to do is click and you will see that you have a member benefit for an entire free month of therapy. So even if finances are an issue, if you're a member of the State Bar of Texas, that is not a barrier. Also, past that 1 month, TLAP can connect you to the Sheeran Crowley Trust Fund. So if you are uninsured, underinsured, for whatever reason cannot afford therapy, there is a trust that has money for you to receive help.
All
And
confidential. Nobody
yes,
knows anything. Because,
yes,
that's one thing too, I think when people admit, and I've been in sort of the alcoholic family where there's a lot of shame and secrecy, and you don't tell anybody because you feel like you're not going to be accepted. And it stays that way for a while. Like you don't start telling your story immediately, right? You have to work through all of that. But if there's any concern that anybody would find out, that should not be a barrier because TLAP is 100% confidential. In addition to the Barry Crowley Trust, who I love Barry Crowley, by the way, uh, the Austin Bar has a benefit called the Matt Kidd Trust for people who maybe are having some mental health related issues, and sometimes the mental health related issues lead to substance abuse, right? But if you can't afford therapy, never let that be a barrier because there are always resources out there through the Texas Bar or the Austin Bar to provide those services free of charge. And I'm a huge proponent of therapy too. Like this job, this profession it's hard, right? It's a tough, you're dealing with fixing people's problems. And I love it. I'm going after this podcast to my weekly visit and I encourage everyone, substance abuse, mental health issues, whatever, if you're in this profession, therapy can be a great outlet for stress. So what advice would you give someone right now who's struggling with addiction and thinks they may have a problem?
reach out, seek help. Allow it to be okay to not be linear. Um, and there's an old saying, it's okay not to be okay. Um, I'll never forget, and I've told this story a million times and I'll never stop telling it. I actually left the practice of law at one point. For 13 months, I was going to be a full time yoga teacher. And when I came back to law with my tail between my legs, my first stop was the Bar College's summer school CLE in Galveston. And that was in 2015. The keynote speaker was former state bar president Alan Dubois. And he got up to the podium and he said, "Hi, my name is Alan Dubois. I'm president of the State Bar of Texas and I'm an alcoholic." Now, my jaw about hit the floor because in my head, we didn't talk about it, which is why I'm so glad that you have this podcast about stopping the stigma. And like I was telling you before, I'm like, more is better. The more people that share their story, the better. Because the first time you start talking about it, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and there's fear. The more you talk about it, the more comfortable you become, the more you realize that other people struggle with the same things, the more you realize you're a lot more okay than you thought that you were. And the areas where you're not okay, you will get the tools to become okay.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And it's perfectly human to not be okay at times. This I was we joked about Facebook earlier, but several other podcast guests have brought this up, and I've always felt this way. I call it fake book sometimes because all you see is this happy side to everyone, and that's just not reality. I mean, people go through struggles, and you're talking about going through trial. I mean, trial will test everything you have in your body because it's an adrenaline rush, but it's also just challenging because you can't get all the sleep you need, and it is stressful, and your clients, in your case, may be life on the line, right? Or in my case, it may be their business on the line. So it's a very stressful profession to be in, uh, no matter who you are, and it's okay to have bad days.
So I also want to add this in because it came to me while I was listening to you, and I completely agree. Um, so self care, you know, it's funny because a lot of us, I think, tend to be prone to all or nothing thinking. And so, if I'm doing this unhealthy thing, whether it's drinking too much or smoking or whatever, it's easy to label yourself as just this not healthy person. But that was actually a really big part of my journey was giving myself self-care even when I was in the throes of addiction. So I remember one time I was probably in my late 20s and I was really hyper fixating on healthy eating because, like we talked about, my love of French fries. I used to exclusively eat that. There was no 80/20. There was just like 100% French fries all the time. And when I started focusing on that, on eating healthy, I don't remember who it was, but I remember somebody saying to me, like, why do you think that it even matters if you eat healthy when, you smoke and you drink too much? And looking back, I can see that every inch along the way, every decision that I made to choose to love myself all contributed to getting me to where I needed to go. So, even if you're not ready to admit that you have a problem, but you have the suspicion that you're struggling with substance abuse, find areas where you can start to love yourself a little more. And they kind of have this cumulative effect. And you'll find that the more that you do, the more that you can do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I say all the time, I don't let things when I start feeling stressed out, my one favorite way to self-care is to take my dogs for a walk because getting outside, getting the fresh air, it's so good for you and it makes you feel better and it makes you not want to, make choices that may not be healthy for you, whatever they are, French fries or alcohol or smoking or whatever. Okay, well, Shayna, thank you so much for coming on our podcast, and we're so grateful to have you as a guest. Thank you for being a volunteer with TLAP. And again, if you're listening to the podcast and you feel like you may have a problem, please reach out to TLAP. It's 100% confidential. No one is going to know. If you feel like you need help, there is help. You're never alone. And TLAP's here to help, and Austin Bar is here to help. And again, 100% confidential. And thank you so much, Shayna.
Thank you.